Hello, welcome to Ready for Mistakes. I'm Jeff Smoody, a photography-based artist from Illinois. This is a photography podcast where I talk to artists about their work and their ideas. Thank you for listening, and I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is, you know the vibe. Welcome to Ready for Mistakes. Hope you guys all got a good chance to listen to my interview with Epiphany Nedler, which was the previous episode. It's a little bit of a long one, but it is really a great conversation, so it's a good one to split on a commute or just maybe while you're making dinner. I don't know, do what you want. I don't know how people listen to podcasts these days. I just make them. Yeah, so this week I'm talking with someone that I met over in Montana during the Chico Review, my friend Bailey Quinlan. She has some very cool work that I think is actually a pretty good transition from what Epiphany makes. While their artwork and interests are a bit different, there are some through lines between both of their works I think unintentionally worked quite well for the sequence of the show. She's based in New York City, where she and her husband, Yuta Kanai, both make their artwork and everything. Yuta is a really great artist, and I really wanted to mention his work because I got a good look of it after recording with Bailey, and it's some very, very cool work. And of course, it's very different from Bailey's work, and we talk about that briefly in the episode. Bailey's work is much more political and activist related, but she also has some really beautiful, poetic, personal work. So to get you guys a baseline of her work, I'm going to quickly read off her bio and everything related to that. Bailey Quinlan uses photography as a tool for activism and connection, sharing vulnerable stories and highlighting injustices with compassion and urgency. She strives to create ethical portraits and resonant landscapes that show the interconnectedness of all people with each other, nature, and the infinite cosmos. Quinlan is the winner of the Female in Focus Award by the British Journal of Photography, a Flash Forward Festival Top 100 winner by the Magenta Foundation, received an honorable mention in the Julia Margaret Cameron Awards for Women Photographers, and has work featured in online by PhMuseum, Dare Grieve, and Velvet Eyes. Quinlan has a BFA from Tufts University and the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Now, one thing that's really cool about the fact that she went to Tufts is that I also studied with two people that went to Tufts. So it's one of those reminders that the art world is this really, tight space, and there's all these, 2 degrees removed kind of things. Like when I talked with Todd Heido for one of my reviews at Chico, it was kind of this fun realization, like, Todd went to Tufts, and my professors, Sarah and Vinny, both went to Tufts as well. So it's one of those really cool things. It's a really great school. Some really wonderful teachers have been working there and also have retired, of course. So in this episode, we talk a little bit about some of the balances of the importance of balancing kind of intense nature of making activist-related work, political-related work, and trying to figure out how to balance that with a positive thread and, showing things such as hope and progress, so it's not just beating it down and being dreary and all that. And that's actually something that Epiphany and I talked about in the episode with her. So again, that through line really works. So I really hope you guys really enjoy this episode, this conversation with Bailey Quinlan. Without anything else left to say, let's get on into this conversation. Hi, Bailey. It's been a few months since I last saw you in person back at Chico. How have you been?
Yes, Jeff, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for having me be a part of this project. I'm very honored and excited to get into it with you. Yes, Chico was a whirlwind. So grateful for that whole experience, being in the mountains in nature with a bunch of other artists, just like sharing our souls with each other. It was really special. So yeah, it's started so many great relationships, including this one.
Absolutely. It's been so fun keeping up with everybody out there, and for people who listen to the public journal episodes I did, I was kind of like fresh after after reviews would come back to the hotel room and be like, so I just got roasted. It was never bad. It was a great experience, and highly recommend people apply to it while it's still open for a couple months now. This is an unpaid plug. So, all right. So let's get into what you've got. I'm always curious how people get started with their work, and it's always more interesting to have the artist describe their origin story in art and all that, whether it be photography or anything art related. So tell me about how you got started.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. This is a great question and just a great kind of way to get context, I guess. But yeah, I don't know, even just as a small child, I was always just like the creative one, the slightly quirky, weird, outspoken one. And I was always just drawn to anything creative, drawing, painting, dancing, just creating, and music, just any of it, drama. So I remember specifically my grandmother, she would take care of us. She would kind of support my parents with childcare. I was lucky enough to have all my sets of grandparents like within a town away from where I grew up. And so spending time with her, I just remember at her card table where we would like put all of our arts and crafts out and just kind of like go at it. And she was just very encouraging creatively, and she was an artist and painter herself. And I grew up to just do any drawing and painting class that I could. I didn't actually start with photography until college, where I made the wild decision to just full on go to art school. I had a lot of interest growing up, but art just always came so naturally to me. And so I just kind of like kept following that without much question. And so when it came time to kind of decide what to do for higher education, I applied to a bunch of schools in Boston. I grew up in Connecticut, so it's just, I don't know, the next big city close by that wasn't New Haven. I wasn't going to like pressure myself to go to a certain school there.
Yeah. Or even New York for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. New York was a little too much of a step, which is actually where I live now. I'm in Brooklyn, but I wasn't ready at the ripe age of 17, 18. So, I was looking at schools in Boston and ended up going to the PhMuseum of Fine Arts, which is actually now technically the art school of Tufts University. At the time, it was a separate entity, and I actually still got my degree from Tufts University, which is kind of a loophole to the whole system.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't get into Tufts separately, which is really funny, but my dad being an engineer, he was like, oh yeah, you can go to art school, it's Tufts. So ended up there. Yeah, and that's how I discovered photography. I mean, I started, it's very, very interdisciplinary there. I mean, it might be a little bit different now, I think, or maybe significantly different now. I think that there was a lot of turnover with faculty, but it was very open and free. We could kind of like build our own art practice and kind of like pick and choose all different media to work in. So I tried printmaking, jewelry making, performance art, which is a wild ride. But I don't know, by maybe halfway through school, I was like, you know what, I have to leave here actually like proficient at one thing. So let me just like commit. And one of my first photography classes, it was really just a random decision to take a photo class. My now husband was the TA of that class, so you can imagine how that went.
I love that. That's fantastic.
But I was so inspired by his work. I actually saw his work on the wall in the hallway before I actually knew it was his. I don't know if you guys had this experience where, you know, you would make an in-check print and you would need to put it up on the wall to let it dry for, you know, a couple hours. Sometimes you would just leave it for a couple days because you kind of forgot it was there. Yeah. You kind of forget about it, whatever.
We just threw that shit around right off the bat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. so I like saw his work, and it's so different from mine. It's funny. It's amazing how you can be inspired by something that's so different from your own work. But I was like, oh wow, I love this, and I need to know this person. So yeah, long story short, now he is my life partner of, oh my goodness, like 12 years, and yeah, he's constantly inspiring me with his work and just his work ethic, honestly, because being an artist is, I don't know, it's kind of like having another full-time job on top of trying to, you know, feed yourself and pay the bills. It's like, but yeah, we can get into that. But basically, photography went from something that was just kind of a curiosity to just being like the thing that my creativity kind of like matched up with, that immediate gratification of being able to like capture something that you're seeing right in front of you, to be able to see something beautiful in something that maybe no one else would see, and to be able to keep that as a perfect record. Yeah, rather than, I guess, other ways of being creative, which I am so awe-inspired by. My grandfather actually was a draftsman, an amazing painter and drawer, and he would carve things out of wood. And there's just a different way, I think, of seeing when you're creating everything from inside, like it's all coming from within you. I don't want to say I'm not that kind of creative, but it doesn't come as naturally to me. I'd much more find something and create that way. But yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I was definitely super interested in the your experience at Tufts / the museum school, whatever folks want to call it specifically these days, because I studied with two people that both went to Tufts, where Sarah Malakoff, she went there, I forget what year, but she was a while ago, well before it merged with Tufts. And Vinnie Martin, who I think got his MFA there. Honestly, I'm not even sure if you guys may have even lined up, for all I know.
Maybe.
Both of them have distinctly different artwork for going to the same school, around like the same kind of spirit of the school before it kind of changed a bit. So he comes down here. I met him. He taught one of my classes at UMass, but it was very cool. Like realizing that and then also telling Todd Heido at Chico, like, yeah, I studied with two people from where you went to get your degree too.
Yeah, exactly. I was actually born the year that Todd graduated from SMFA.
Oh wow! Yeah.
I think it's really funny.
Yep. Yeah, that was a pretty fun little connection there. So I like that that they still allowed you to kind of experiment a lot, and I think that's really important for even people that like know what media they want to do. Like I knew that I wanted to do photography, but I still had to take these other classes, like I took Intelio printmaking. With the Tufts experience, I'm really interested in how your work compares to those that you studied under, as well as past and even your cohort of students that you were around.
Yes, there's such a wide range. And I don't recognize the names of your colleagues that went there, but I'm for sure going to check out their work. And just from thinking back, I mean, Jim Dow taught me photo history. He was, I think, had already taught his last large format studio class when I started, but I was lucky enough to take his photo history 1 and 2 courses, I think, and he's such a kind man and just taught me and inspired me so much about the history of photography. Claire Beckett taught me large format photography and also how to create and conceptualize ethical portraiture. She's just an amazing person, a huge heart, and an amazing storyteller. And Bill Berg taught me how to make a print in the darkroom. He was such a stickler for making sure the detail was still in the shadows and that the highlights weren't blown out. And I'm just so grateful to him because I use those skills every day of my life. You know, it's just, it's that kind of thing where you're like, Bill, I've been in this basement for hours. I haven't seen the light of day. Like, just give me a break. But he's like, no, you need to change the filter, or like, no, it needs more time, or I don't know. I'm just so grateful for all of them, just bringing their expertise, and just bringing that part of themselves to the work, because it's such an interesting relationship that people can have to teaching when you're an artist. And I'm sure you can go on and on about this.
But I find it really fun that I feel like every art school needs to have someone named Bill that's a stickler about darkroom printing, because I had the exact same. I had a Bill O'Donnell. He retired the year that I graduated, and I remember distinctly in my my medium format film class in undergrad that he looked at one of my photos and said, kind of almost the opposite. It was like, the sky here is gray. It's a night photo. It should probably be black. Like, but don't make it so black that it's like lost. So he really helped me with exactly that, finding like the little bits of detail that were able to be pulled out. So I guess if you were to compare your even your work now versus your work then to those that you were studying alongside in the photo program at the museum school, how different or even how similar do you think you compare to your fellow students?
Yeah, it is very cool. Thank you for asking that. I'm remembering specifically my large format class that I actually took with Cassandra Close. She's a super talented photographer and is working in a lot of portraiture now, kind of documentary. And Emil Cohen, who was another classmate of mine, who also works in portraiture. I've leaned a little bit differently. Like, I feel like I lean toward more landscape, and I sprinkle portraiture in there, like environmental portraiture. But for my commercial work, it's all portraits, so maybe that's where I get the balance. Yeah, Emil's work is also just so inspiring, and it's so great to see everyone flourishing. But we definitely, I think, tended to have a more documentary stint to our work. It's probably inspired by Claire. It just made sense that we were kind of just budding in our creativity with her. Yeah, and my husband too. I mean, I think I mentioned before, like, we make very different work, even just stylistically. Like, he is always working in black and white, more high contrast, kind of underexposed. Mine is like almost always color and kind of warmer. But we are constantly just inspired by each other and encouraging each other and giving each other feedback. But it's beautiful to have people in your circle that are doing similar things and just different enough that you can get some new perspective on. Yeah.
That's something I think that most people in our generation of artists, that we're kind of in that point where we're really kind of building, whether it's like a circle of people or just like individual people. We're kind of gathering those people that we trust, a small group of people that we could just kind of shoot the shit with and be able to get some honest feedback. And I know a lot of folks have always said, like, you know, your best friend or your partner might not always be the best person to talk to, but in some cases they are the best person to talk to, because it's like, it's one or the other. You don't really have someone that's kind of in the middle. You always have someone that's like, your partner or best friend is the person to talk to, or they're probably just going to be a yes person. And
like, we are each other's cheerleaders, but we will be real with each other when we're like,
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, my best friend is someone that she will call me out on, like, if a photo is just not working or something like that. And, you know, my partner's not a photographer, but she's a writer, and she's able to help me out with a lot of that side of things, because that's something I don't have training in.
That's huge, Jeff.
Having a variety of artists in our life.
Yeah, honestly, that's been so important to me recently. Like, actually, I think I started this after Chico because I was so inspired by the community there. I started hosting in my apartment, in my one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, just different artists that I've, you know, accumulated around me, like, in the city, and over the past like years/my lifetime. I mean, like some of my old friends from when I grew up, but even I've had some cousins come through. We kind of meet up once a month to share the work that we've been working on, get feedback, even just like share what we've been inspired by lately. It's just a really beautiful way to have that date on the calendar to kind of come together. And some people see it as like a way to hold each other accountable to keep working on that project. And others are just getting inspired to maybe work on something. But it's just so important because a life of an artist can feel lonely sometimes. So to know that we're all in it together in some way is really beautiful.
Especially with such a, generally speaking, solo practice that is photography. Like, not everyone is going to be like the Gerber Nick studio kind of thing. Like, not everyone has a collaborative art practice.
Yeah.
So we're very notoriously introverted, notoriously solo folks. But moving into talking about your work from the past few years since leaving school, of course, the work that you brought to Chico is one that really brought me in initially. But looking at your work post Chico, the Superfund series was really one that fascinated me a lot, and it's a really important and kind of dark side of relatively recent American history. And I feel like it's been coming up a lot more lately. I know Harvard had a show called Devour the Land that I sadly didn't get to see in person, but they had a lot of work that revolved around this exact topic. And of course, our beloved Kodak is a culprit of contributing to Superfund sites. Who would have thought? So this is one of those like really tough situations that the country's been dealing with. So I'm really curious about how this project gets started, as well as if you could tell listeners what a Superfund site is for people that aren't familiar with the term.
Yeah, for sure. I can just start there. That makes sense. Because I really didn't know until I started kind of investigating this, because it sounds like super fun, doesn't it? No, it's a super fund, the Superfund with a D. But they are contaminated sites, usually by industrial activity and dumping toxic chemicals into the environment, that have been deemed by the federal government to be unsafe to inhabit and are added to the national priorities list for scheduled cleanup. So the Superfund, I actually found out more recently, is actually paid for by us, taxpayers. So when you think about industry that have been, polluting the environment for, decades, centuries, sometimes this is in the past, and the companies don't even exist anymore to be held accountable. It's very complex. But it's extremely expensive to clean these things up. These sites that are just, like I said, uninhabitable, they need to be like completely turned over and excavated. So it actually does come from taxpayer money. So that Superfund is all because of us. But my interest in them honestly probably started in high school when I found out like what brownfield sites are. It's kind of just like a lower designation from my understanding. Again, I'm an artist, not a scientist, but hey, like we are all kind of both, if you have an interest. Just knowing that these sites can kind of be anywhere, and are all over the landscape, but we may not know, like, oh, behind that chain link fence, like, no one could go there for a reason. I think when I was still in school, I even had this idea to start actually documenting them when I was still in Boston, but didn't actually kind of like get this idea off the ground. I don't know if you ever, Jeff, have this idea that you're chewing on for literally years, maybe even a decade, and you will make that work. It's just like, maybe it's not the right time or for whatever reason. Yeah, I think when I moved to Brooklyn, it was just very apparent that there are just so many of them around. And Gowanus Canal is right in my neighborhood, and it's, if not the most contaminated waterway, then one of the very most contaminated in the country. So I think just knowing that was right in my backyard just kind of gave me this sense of responsibility and urgency to just lay this out and just start this series of locations that can feel very nondescript, but are, extremely dangerous to our physical bodies and for the plants and animals in the area. So it just kind of came from a place of urgency, I guess, to answer your question, just kind of like how it got started. And I even had, when I was describing this project to someone, a fellow artist, I think he's a painter, just like a friend of a friend, he was like, why? Like, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
And I was like,
yeah.
I kind of stopped to think about it, and I was like, how could I not? I don't know if that ever happens to you, Jeff. It's just like this feeling of like, I need to be showing this and pointing this out and highlighting it. And I don't know if he was saying it in a way to actually, question the importance of it. But it really kind of got me thinking about why we make art and who we make it for, whose eyes are they really for. But yeah.
I think that sounds to me a lot like probably the direction of the question that he probably was having, because I remember there was a Stephen Shore interview where he was talking about basically exactly that feeling of like, we often don't, and even Todd Heidel's, I think, even talked about this, where it's like we often don't make the work that we want to make or the work that about things that we love, but we still do. But we are often found making work that we kind of feel like we need to. Like if you don't have that need feeling, then perhaps it's not necessarily something to make right now.
Yeah.
I'm incredibly paraphrasing, but this was a while ago. But like I know that like all of these, like I'm scrolling through what you have on your website, and I mean a lot of these locations fall into exactly that way that you described it before, of like very nondescript. These are the same kind of things that I see in more industrial parts of Illinois.
Yeah, they could kind of be anywhere. Yeah.
I feel like there's definitely some smaller ones here, not too far from New Bedford, especially with all the old mill buildings and everything. But what's really interesting to me, and I think this falls into a lot of the work that you have around these kinds of topics, is that they're very visually interesting, and the compositions are they're very pleasing to the eye, but there's always that kind of underlying like. Sometimes it's more clear than others that there's this pretty dark undertone about the subject matter. I think that's one of the reasons why it works really well for me, because these are not really hospitable places. So when you were out there taking these photographs, how did you go about physically navigating the ones that were a little bit less than pleasant to be in versus the ones like I'm looking at the one of the Lowe's parking lot, for example, like that versus some of the more treacherous, I'm not sure if that's the right word.
Yes, this is very interesting because I was very drawn to the fact that they are very dangerous, but they're extremely accessible. The Lowe's parking lot is actually right along the canal. Like you could jump into it from the Lowe's parking lot. The Gowanus Canal that I mentioned is one of the most polluted waterways. So I took a photo of the water there from the parking lot. I wasn't about to, jump in, but I mean, people have actually for protest or for their own performance art, but no one should touch that water. It is actually in the process of getting cleaned up now. So that's also another distinction. Like some of the places that I've been documenting are already technically cleaned up and are in the past. They've, I guess, been cleared by the federal and state governments to be able to build on now, but I am very curious about where those thresholds lie and if the people that are, renting an apartment that was built on that property, are they required to be notified? Do they have to know? Because how could there not be some remnant of it in the groundwater or in the air somehow? And that's actually in a lot of the reports that I found in this very dense database through the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, where I found the Superfund site, kind of exact locations and the history of those sites and the actual contamination like what chemicals are made up of each site. But also the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's environmental remediation database. So really fun stuff. But it's all like publicly accessible. You can find the exact street intersections, find out exactly what company was doing the contamination and what the property is being used for now. So I'm very curious about the accountability aspect, and also just the people that live on that land now.
It's it really kind of makes me think of Richard Misrock's Petrochemical America, which is a book that I've just been sleeping on getting. And I mean, when making this work, were you thinking about artists from any generation that have kind of been interested in the same kinds of subject matter while you were either in the field shooting or back at the studio editing the work?
Yes, I love that book, and I love that you brought it up because it's been so inspiring to me. It's sitting right next to me in preparation for this. But Petrochemical America, just for folks that aren't familiar with the story, it's a book that's a collaboration between Richard Misrock and Kate Orff, who is a landscape architect, and their collaboration is very inspiring to me. They made the book to shed light on an area of New Orleans known as Cancer Alley because of all the contaminants in the water downstream from the Mississippi River that's affecting the health of folks that live there. So I think that collaborative aspect is just so key, and it's actually something that I'm investigating with higher education. Do I want to go back to school for something that's more environmental science related so that I can kind of inform my own work and maybe make change in that way. But I think being able to collaborate with someone on this project would be spectacular, just to be able to get someone who's really in that sphere and knows more on a technical level that can inform the work and just make it that much stronger. But that's the tricky part, is like finding someone, like gaining access to the right person who like understands my vision and is willing to volunteer their time and expertise to kind of put something together. But I feel like something of this importance and caliber like requires that. So that's definitely a next step for this project, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And with the work that you have for it so far, is it still like New York focused, or are there areas outside while working on other bodies of work that you have? Have you managed to like kind of sneak in other super fun sites to contribute to the pool of images?
Yeah. I did start with just Brooklyn, just to kind of have my kind of sphere, just to kind of have a limiting factor to it. But I actually, when I was in Montana for Chico, I like knew that we were going to be really close to Butte, which is one of the most contaminated cities for copper mining historically. So I'm investigating a couple of different locations across the country. Like whenever I happen to go somewhere, I kind of do some investigating and see if I can kind of add that to the collection. We'll just kind of like see where it goes from there.
Yeah, I think that it's I like the idea of it being very focused on Brooklyn, obviously for your own personal locale, but I've always been interested in like projects that start that way and see if broadening it out is makes it more impactful, or like obviously it's something that you never know until you do it kind of thing. And having like the way that you've been shooting all these like pretty deadpan kind of styled photos can thankfully be done pretty much anywhere. And I feel like the ones that are in much wider open areas like Montana and such are a very different way of shooting than being in Brooklyn. Like I really think about those kind of documentaries that my dad and I would watch when I was a kid about kind of like what the world would look like if humans just disappeared, and the kind of nature taking things back. And I feel like these kind of Superfund sites almost are like an extreme version of that, because there's so much human variable in it still, even though like the photographs that you have, and there's not a single human being that I've seen, at least knowingly. And I think that kind of contributes to that feeling. It's also something, it's like a subject part of America that is it's not something that most Americans or even most people in North America or elsewhere have to deal with, because Superfund sites may be everywhere, but like not everyone lives in, Niagara or Rochester or, along the Mississippi River, but it's something that a lot of us are becoming more acutely aware of. So I'm really curious how this work, and then your series American Values that you brought to Chico, how they kind of relate, especially since they're they're related in being a very important and heavy subject about America, but also one is something that everybody, no matter what, has to deal with. But then there's the Superfund sites. It's like not everyone has to deal with it, but we're all kind of dealing with it in one way or another.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, the American Values Project was definitely born out of the Superfund project, I think. I think that maybe one of the Gowanus Canal images is actually in that same series in the American Values Project. Because as I was honestly just like driving around the country, I would just come across these landscapes, whether it be like a field full of oil rigs or a cemetery, quote unquote cemetery of the innocents of aborted fetuses that were kind of memorialized with crosses by an anti-abortion group in Indiana. I would just kind of collect these sites, and I'm like, this is kind of a portrait of America's values. I mean, over time, there's so many things wrong with this country, as far as just kind of like disregard for human life, and it all kind of comes down to a lack of good leadership. But I honestly didn't really see that through line until I documented a lot of different places that were, for example, the site of a lynching or the site of a mass shooting, that I was just kind of keeping it so broad, because my heart is tied to all of these issues. And as an American, for better or worse, I find a responsibility to shedding light on these things that have happened that we just can't forget, or else we're just going to keep repeating ourselves. So honestly, like having them all be a part of one project made a lot of sense to me. But I started to get feedback that like maybe it is too broad, and maybe I do need to kind of pare it back. So I'm kind of experimenting with how that kind of through line brings all of these different kind of points of trauma over the American landscape, and kind of combines them into one ethos of what it is like to live in this place, and have those reminders in the land and in specific locations, but not actually having to think about it on your way to work or just walking down the street. You may not even know that something happened within your community decades before, or you may be haunted by it, and you just kind of have to put it in the back of your mind so you can just get through the day. So I was very interested in how these locations are just all over the place in a country that's kind of like founded on theft and genocide, and has gotten a little better, but plenty of things have happened along the way that color NH's history, that if we think about it all the time, like, will we even get out of bed, So
Exactly, yeah.
There's also something about this project and shedding light on all these different locations on the landscape that I want to make sure that there is hope. So I'm kind of working that into the project moving forward, to show that there are things that are being done to not attempt to, I guess, fix the past, but correct for it a little bit, and and that there is hope, because without hope there is only despair. So I just want to make sure that that project inspires people to try to create a different world and a better world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that, after, looking through a lot of the photos, like there are those photos of like distinct, like specific locations of, like you mentioned, a lynching or a shooting or whatever. Like I'm thinking like the Columbine one especially. But then there are other photos that kind of have that duality of like, it has like these negative things going on in the scene, but then there's also like those signs of progress, those signs of like attempting to make things better in whatever way possible. And it's obviously something that I think a lot of people that work in this vein of subject matter often struggle with, because it's like it's almost easy to go for just the negative and only the negative and focus on the negative, but at the end of the day you're beating a dead horse. And I think that effort of trying to bring in the progress among the necessary acknowledgement of the negative side of things, corporate America to racism and sexism and things like that, and then visualizing those threads. And as you work through the sequence, those threads are very present.
And as artists, like, how do we keep people engaged, right? Because it's like, it could be the equivalent of doom scrolling, and like, that's not healthy.
Exactly, yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's really our responsibility to shed light, but to also, be that light at the end of the tunnel that people are trying to get toward.
Yeah, exactly. And like, it reminds me a lot of like two different series that are similar in vein, but not. They're obviously a bit different. Like Chris Graves' Oblique Reality is one that I looked at back in undergrad, and his was very racially centric of people of color being murdered or whatever situation, often connected to police brutality in that series. And then Joel Sternfeld's On This Site is a more relatively historic. That series is another similar thing. It's a photograph of a location where something heinous, something really like seriously bad happened, and then going back to how that like nature taking over, it's almost like modern society taking over that location. Like it's a pretty interesting way to look at it in a contemporary sense, even things that happened not all that long ago in reality. So when you were researching a lot of these places, what was the kind of process for you to do that research and determine what it was that you were going to be taking a photograph of?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Like I said, I feel like it organically just started because I was traveling to places and I would just find these sites kind of by chance sometimes. So I started putting this together, and then started to actually, next time I took a trip, plan out a route, plan out a couple of sites that I know, hey, I might not ever be back in this state again. Like, let me try to document here and make time for it. So I have many locations on my Google Maps for places to go. As I mentioned, I stopped in Butte when I was in Montana. There are plenty of places for a couple cross-country road trips that I've taken that I made time for it to stop. Google is my best friend. Like, obviously,
yes.
There's just so much that is publicly available, but a couple of resources that really helped me were the Equal Justice Initiative has a report that they put together that includes a map of over 4,000 lynchings, and they've actually put up memorial plaques in, if not all of them, then most of them. So that helped me a lot in actually finding out these exact locations. Like, even if you get to a place, do you know exactly where it happened, the exact street corner or the exact site. So that is just so important to, again, just have our have American history be there on display for everyone to read, just as passersby, as tourists, or even people that have lived in that neighborhood for a while and just never knew. Maybe for family members of the people affected by that atrocity can just have that little sense of acknowledgement. Another resource was the Southern Poverty Law Center. They have an extremely detailed interactive map of Confederate monuments, from statues to street names named after Confederate folks, or even schools that were named after them, and what their current status is, whether they've been removed or renamed. So it's just very intriguing to kind of look through, no matter where you live in the country, just to see what's going on in your neighborhood or where they tend to be focused. But those resources were really helpful for my research. But
yeah, I'm thinking about how, like, those resources I found. I've been starting to have a growing interest in, like, I guess you could say decommissioned, or not abandoned isn't quite the right word, but they are inevitably abandoned things, but like decommissioned infrastructure. And I found some resources, can't remember the name of it, but I've been looking at like railroads that are no longer in service and using those as like a way to kind of like start, like, go there and then start to explore around it. Now, when you were out and about traveling the country, finding these photographs, I know that a lot of times people associate a lot of these with the South and with parts of the Midwest and all that, but a lot of times they even reach further, like even out here in the Northeast. And I remember, back in Wisconsin, like that, there are people that have Confederate flags in their lawn, and I'm like, you have no concept of history, do you? And I find that really fascinating. Did you find things like that happen visually when you were traveling around, that there were almost people willingly holding on to things like that, despite the obvious and generally should be known negative history behind those symbols and all that?
yeah, I mean, this country is a wild place, and nothing surprises me anymore. I guess that's how I that's how I answer that question. To be honest, yeah. And very rarely was I alone, if not ever. So I never felt like physically unsafe. Yeah. I also am like a very youthful looking white woman, so I can kind of get away with a lot of kind of act like I'm pretty innocent and just taking some pictures with my camera. But just trying to gain as much access to spaces as I can, and just utilizing that as something that I can do with the body that I was put in.
Have you ever used the student or researcher card while out and about, and people may question you?
Oh yeah, I'm a student of life, don't you know?
That's my favorite thing. Is like, we're not formally a student, but that's also, folks, that's why you keep your student IDs. Always. You can get discounts. Yeah. For those of you in the Northeast, Hunt's Photo and Video, they give you a student discount if you have your student ID. This is not sponsored. I'm trying to scam them. That's not true. I like them. They're good.
I actually worked for them for like a month, believe it or not, in between jobs. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Make use of that employee discount where you can.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to shift gears over to a more personal project, and just to briefly tell me about your series A Day at the Lake, and how that series works for you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I knew that this project needed to be a book before I even started it. So this is actually something that I began back in 2018, and I am actively working on trying to get it published now. But I had the idea for the project because I was kind of working through the end of my grandmother's life as she was grappling with the impending end of her life. It was something that I couldn't relate to, and she was just really ready to go for a while. Like, she lived a full life, and she was, asking me if I could photograph her obituary photo, and she was telling me the music she wanted to play at her funeral, and I wasn't ready. And so something that I could do, I think, was try to process it with photographs. So she wanted to visit her hometown in Wisconsin, where she grew up until she was 20. She relocated because my grandfather decided he wanted to find work out in the Northeast, and kind of moved out here so that they could start their family. So she kind of left everything that she knew and loved and was familiar to her. And so she just has these like memories of this Midwest town that she grew up in, Ashland, Wisconsin, that were she just kind of spoke about so fantastically. And I had this vision of this place that was so romanticized. So I knew that I wanted to go with her, and I would just kind of see what came of it. I actually had a pretty regimented shot list because I had a finite amount of film as far as what my budget would allow, and so I tried to mathematically figure out exactly how many shots I could get. It wasn't exactly conducive to creativity, but I made sure, and I stayed on schedule. But we did all the work that is on my website as of now was taken in a week span on a family trip.
Love those kind of projects.
Yeah, exactly. The pressure was good, and I'm like just so amazed by how much we did together. And especially considering that, you know, a lot of it was out of my control, right? I went with my uncle and his family, and my grandmother, who was living with them for a handful of years at the end of her life. But my uncle was the only one that could drive the rental car. So like I was kind of beholden to him to like ask him to pull over because I really wanted to get a photo of that field or like, you know, hey, can we take a detour and go down this road? And my whole family was so patient. I'm so grateful. But I really utilized my grandmother's stories and her retelling of all these places as sort of a map to kind of figure out what locations to go to. Yeah,
that's like, it reminds me of a project I've always wanted to do, because my grandpa's from Colby, Wisconsin, and that's where my family initially settled. So I've been a Midwesterner by blood for my entire life, going back generations. And that, like, the way that you described it is kind of exactly what I would expect that project to go, like having short period of time to really like nail down as much as possible. So yeah, like that way is like the way that this work is so much more quiet and peaceful, and like very much resonates with my own interests as a Midwesterner. And it kind of brings about a kind of nostalgic comfort for me. So while you're looking at this work now, how do you feel about the images and the work as a whole?
Wow, yeah, that's so interesting because it's like, I know I have a physical connection to this place, like in my blood and in my bones because of my grandmother. But it was my first time going, so I didn't have like actual memories myself, but I almost feel like her memories became mine in the process of working through this project with her when she was still around. And even since, I've gotten really close with my cousins out there that I never really grew up knowing, but in communicating with them and visiting this place a couple times now. I just came back in July from a family reunion and took a bunch of photos to add to the project. And they were really helpful and supportive, like getting me documents and old letters and old photos to kind of incorporate in as archival material, and just feeling so welcomed by this family that I have this kind of flesh and blood connection to. That real Midwestern hospitality has definitely been beautiful to experience. Yeah.
It's a lot different than Southern hospitality. It's a little bit more neighborly up in the Midwest.
Truly.
Nothing against Southern hospitality. They're wonderful down there. But yeah, it's something that I think is really important for us to like document our families. And like, I'm always reminded by some of my friends that do exactly that. To like, you know, it's one of the reasons that I started my Polaroid series, is because it's not only documenting my day-to-day life and family and all that, but it's also something for art practice. And I love that you're able to continue it even after she's passed, to be able to continue that story. And, you know, the idea that, you know, a person dies twice, when they die and then when the last person says their name for the last time.
Wow, that's wild.
And like to maintain that as long as possible.
Yeah.
So,
and honestly, like knowing that she was the last of her generation to be able to identify people in old images, or be able to read handwritten letters that were written in script. A lot of stories and just knowledge left with her. So I actually I took a lot of audio recordings when I was there because she was really sharp up till the very end. Yeah, it was amazing. So I feel like this kind of just happens with us photographers. Like we become the de facto family historian, whether we'd like to or not, because we're just like naturally more interested and invested. So I'm happy to be that person, and here we are.
So before we wrap up here in a couple minutes, I would love to hear about what you've been working on these days. I know you said you mentioned working on the book for Day at the Lake, but also like what else have you been kind of brewing up in the background?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for this question. Yes, I'm very excited to actually co-publish the book. I didn't mention this before, but my grandmother, she was also an artist herself. She actually, she played oboe in her high school band in Ashland, Wisconsin with John Sarkowski. He played clarinet. So they sat next to each other. And that's just like a really funny part of family history that
who would have thought that John Sarkowski was going to have a family connection?
I know. Maybe I had no choice in the matter, and I just needed to find photography eventually. But yeah, so I really want to co-publish the book with my images and her music that she wrote and poetry. That was actually something she was trying to do toward the end of her life, and I just really want that to like come to be. Yeah. But I also, another project that has been, steadily happening, I've been doing shoots for it for a couple of years now, is investigating people's relationships to their bodies, like as a vessel, but as this outward way of representing ourselves, but it can feel so detached from who we feel like we actually are as a person. And our relationship to what our skin sac looks like or what it feels like at any given moment. So I've been kind of working on more abstract, more intimate imagery with individuals that have invited me into their spaces. It's been a really beautiful practice and very cathartic for like everyone involved. So that's just something really exciting that I'm kind of figuring out how to put together into a project, but that's something that's on the horizon that it might be long term. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it's a nice change of pace from the deadpan landscape.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, along with that, are there anything coming up, exhibitions or anything like that you might have that you're able to share, if there is anything like that?
Yeah. Well, I actually I'm going to another review. I'm going to review Santa Fe in November. So I'm really stoked for that, just to connect with publishers, again, to get this book off the ground. But yeah, I'm really excited by that opportunity.
Absolutely. Yes, so one last thing, where can people find you? You'll be down in the description, of course, but where can people find you and your work?
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, my website is baileyquinlan.com. I'm on Instagram, too, at Bailey_Quinlan_. But yeah, you can find all my work there, and much more to come.
Yeah, I'm very excited, especially for the inevitable book. I'm excited. Just you describing that sounds very much like something I want to have on my shelf anyway. So,
thank you, Jeff.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have in the future. And yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you again, Jeff. It's been such a pleasure to chat and to catch up in this way. I appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you so much. And everyone that's listening, thank you for listening. And I will see you in the next one.